Jacqui, Luma, Carly, welcome to the stage. How are you all doing?
Good, thanks. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Thanks very much. Thanks for joining us. And I'm excited for this conversation that we're going to have. It was really impactful and insightful, the warm-up session that we had. So I'm going to kind of hit off with a question, and then we can work around each other as we go through the answers. So naturally, I'd like to start with what it's like as a woman sales leader. And as women sales leaders, what do you feel are the unique perspectives or qualities that you bring to a role that has a positive impact on a sales team? Let's start with you, Jacqui.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, James. And thanks for making time for this discussion as well. I think it's really valuable, and it's great to see the support for women in sales, but also, as you said, other underrepresented groups as well. Just to take a very quick step back before I answer that, this can sometimes feel like a slightly charged, perhaps divisive topic. And so I just want to stress before we get into it that I think male and female sales leaders have much more in common than is different and sets them apart. So I just kind of want to state that first. And, the science really backs this up. There are actually very few differences between the male and the female brain. And where the differences really come from is through societal norms, different expectations, conscious and unconscious bias. And we obviously see how that then translates into the workplace. So I think, as you've said, I've been in sales leadership for 15 years. I've been in tech sales for nearly 30. And I've seen some tremendous progress made during that time. When I joined, I was typically, the only female in the sales team, unfortunately. And I was remembering as we were preparing for this that in my very first job, I was actually asked to move and go and sit with the secretaries because the assumption was that I couldn't be one of the AEs because I was female. And wow. that there's no disparaging comment there around secretaries, but I'm sure, we would all be horrified if anything like that happened now. So we've come a long way. The last two organisations I've worked in have had gender parity for females and males at an AE level. But we still don't see that translate through at a leadership and executive level. So that's really the challenge and the thing that we all need to be focusing on and asking ourselves what we can do in our orgs. So I guess with that kind of context and scene setting to answer the question, unfortunately today, I'm still one of very, very few female sales leaders in the organisations that I work in. And so that allows me to bring a very unique set of perspectives and different life experiences that I can really bring to my team. And I think that really helps me to grow a diverse team and a very inclusive culture because I've always been part of an underrepresented group. And I think that gives you a bit of a superpower when it comes to creating an inclusive environment. And then the final point I'd make is that I think if we're thinking about how we encourage more women to take that step into frontline management, into senior leadership, just seeing perhaps a slightly different style and approach that resonates with them and feels authentic for them, hopefully will encourage them to make that next step. And I think that's something that I bring.
Fantastic. What are your thoughts, Luma?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Jacqueline definitely touched on a lot of important points. Just looking at the way that I hire, the way that, the team, that I look at my team as well is trying to bring in different people from different backgrounds as well. Not just gender diversity, but also looking at different personalities, different backgrounds, and things like that. And just touching on that, that's something that I actively think about when I'm hiring my team. But on the other hand, I think mentorship and development is a big focus for me as well. I'm not saying men don't do that, but it's looking at the personalities and just kind of trying to match that with the opportunities that we can give them and further developing these personalities and skills within a team and looking at the opportunities that we get as a company and saying, oh, this would be great for my team, even though it's might be a little bit early for the team or for a BDR team, but getting them that exposure as well early on is really important to me. And just kind of thinking long-term rather than just, okay, this is my team, this is what I can do with them now, but also just long-term for them as well.
Great perspective. Carly?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Luma and Jacqui said, which is nice alignment, but that's not always the way. So one of the things, as Jacqui said earlier, these kind of questions can come across quite loaded. And companies are almost quick, in my experience, to kind of jump and put together a women in sales group or put together a kind of token gesture that doesn't really drive change. So for me, I think the unique kind of role we can play once you do get into that kind of leadership level is really start being a voice for change and start being that catalyst for actionable change rather than so when it comes down to hiring, for example, why is there not enough women in leadership? It's probably because most leadership teams look the same. And that's not just a lack of diversity when it comes to gender. It's everything Luma said. It's class, it's race, it's background, lived experience. And the better mix you can get on your team and your leadership function, the better your team is going to perform and the better ideas are going to be put on the table. So I think it's really important that we not only help the next generation coming up into leadership, but we also use our position, our voices, our influence around the community and LinkedIn to really start being a catalyst for that change that is going to get more opportunities and more women stepping up into that next level.
Fantastic. One of the things that we talked about on Monday in our preparation was what differences have you experienced in the organizations that you've worked for, you know, coming across things like the gender pay gap, how feedback is assessed, how promotions have been delivered. Have you got any examples where, you know, it may not have, you know, you may not have experienced it or seen it in the most positive light in terms of how women are best supported in the organization? Who wants to take that first?
Carly, do you want to jump in? Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, firstly, I've seen a real commitment to the reducing any gender pay gap and a real commitment to making sure that male and female counterparts are absolutely on the same salary bands. That said, there still is a persisting gender pay gap, and I've certainly, you know, have heard of that in organisations that I've worked in. And I think the reason for that, the way that you report up your gender pay, is that you effectively just roll everyone up into a pool. You don't report at the different seniority levels. So while you might have people being paid the same at an AE or a frontline manager role, when you actually roll that all up together, because you have such a small number of female senior executives on, you know, the higher salary packages, that is being outbalanced by the number of males that are at that level. So it does come back, I think, to this same issue again of fixing the number of senior leaders. And, you know, we've seen that with, you know, Salesforce. I think they kicked off a lot of the gender pay initiatives back in 2016 and spent a huge amount of money getting everybody onto the right level. What they've discovered is that they have to refresh that exercise every couple of years because it gets out of whack again because the promotion levels are not the same for male and female. So there persists being an issue. So that's at the crux of it, I think. That's
very interesting. Carly?
100%. So one of the things that we were discussing actually in the run up to this, I've personally never been managed by a female. So my senior leadership team has always been very male dominated. And I think one of the things I've seen consistently, and I don't think it's intentionally done, but I've definitely seen, especially when you're coming into management at a younger age, is almost a perception of weakness. And if there's one word that I would never describe myself as, it's a weak character or a weak person. And anyone that's met me, I've seen a few of you in the chat, would probably agree with that. I'm quite a direct person. And that almost then comes across as undermining. Even though you're trying to protect me and you're trying to look after me, it almost like you wouldn't do that to a male counterpart necessarily. So that then becomes in and of itself an issue for me, because I don't need that level of kind of babysitting. It almost feels like I'm more than capable. My results speak for themselves. My team's results speak for themselves. And I think sometimes there's almost like an underlying perception that men have to look after women. And we've spoke about it before at my last speech here, where we spoke about that psychologically safe environment, and Jackie's hinted at it today as well. If you're not creating that, us three women are completely different characters. You're not going to address and treat all women the same. We're totally different. Men are exactly the same, and it shouldn't be a historically it's very us versus them when these kind of conversations come up, and it's not at all. It's about creating that environment where we can have hard conversations, we can raise difficult subjects, no one's taking offense at it, but we're actually again using that to be that catalyst to change and positive outcomes. And I think it's really important when we're talking about the gender side to also look at the issues that men face. They're higher chance of suicide, they're generally more likely to suffer in silence with mental health. Like, those kind of things also need to be taken into consideration by leadership across the board. But without having those open conversations and creating that environment to begin with where people feel safe enough to do that, it's just going to be the same kind of conversations we're having. So I think that's a really important part, to change perceptions and understand that while you feel you might be helping that person, you may not be. So it's worth having that conversation to see how they like to be managed, what their style is, how they like getting feedback, etc., etc.
That's a fair comment. Have you got something to add, Luma?
Not really. I think Carly and Jacqueline have added it or have summarized it really well.
Fantastic. On that then, you know, the fact that you have identified these differences in organizations, have any of you experienced or seen a bias, you know, towards or away from someone not getting an opportunity because they are women, or is that impacted you? Jacqui, have you got an example?
Yeah, there's a relatively recent example that springs to mind, and I think I shared with you all when we were doing our prep call. And you know, this was in an organisation that was extremely committed to gender diversity and making sure that there were equal promotion opportunities. That said, there was a situation where we were doing calibration of promotion submissions. And somebody that I was mentoring had been put forward for a promotion by her regional sales director. And outside of the calibration call, which was the first kind of red flag, a couple of senior leaders had a chat about this individual who they really didn't have any direct working experience of. This wasn't an individual they were seeing in meetings, you know, on a day-to-day basis. And they had decided that this individual was not ready for promotion. I immediately jumped in and was able to give really specific examples of why that wasn't the case and why she was absolutely eligible for promotion and perhaps had even been overlooked in the previous cycle. And I had lots of, you know, very specific examples because of the mentoring relationship that we had. And, you know, I'm pleased to say that immediately, you know, that decision was overturned and she got her promotion and, you know, we got the right outcome. But it really concerned me. I mean, what would have happened if I wasn't in the room? And I think this is a really important point. I think we talk a lot about mentoring, but we should also think about sponsoring and just making sure that we give women and other underrepresented, you know, groups, you know, employees in our organizations access to the same informal networks that others enjoy. You know, a lot of our leaders, a disproportionate amount of our senior leaders are men, are white men, and, you know, their informal social networks that they have at work will not always, and I don't want this to be kind of an awful generalization, but people do tend to socialize with people that are like them, people that look and sound like them. So if that is the case, that could lead to really difficult, you know, unfortunate, you know, biases like the one that I just mentioned, showing up and having a really, you know, impactful effect on someone's promotion opportunities.
Fantastic. What else is there? Have you got to add? Luma, have you got any examples? Or Carly?
I've got a similar example, but not necessarily that it was seen in a wrong way. But I had someone on the team that was quite junior. She was a fresh grad when I had hired her, but had, you know, a very technical background. So her route was not necessarily the typical one from BDR to an AE route, but she wanted to go down the sales engineering route. And, you know, I've worked with her for a pretty long time, for about a year. And then she was, I think she was, from my perspective, I saw that she had some gaps that she wanted to address and that we wanted to work on before she moved into her new role. So the opportunity that, you know, from my side, I provided her was kind of start presenting to the team, start answering questions for the team. And then we expanded it out and said, let's look at this from a different point of view, and let's have some more people see what you're doing, and let's pair you up with the right person so you can learn from that person. And then once she was ready and she was, you know, in the position where I felt like she'd be confident and she'd be more comfortable, I paired her up with her potential future manager and said, hey, I think you should take a look. And, you know, she was quite good at going out, speaking to people, and kind of getting her internal champions on side as well. But it was giving her these opportunities and saying, hey, I think you are not seeing what she's doing in the background, and she's learning a lot of stuff, and giving her this visibility and within the company as well, that, you know, ultimately made her move from BDR role to a sales engineer role. Fantastic.
Carly?
Yeah, so I've seen a few examples. And one of the things, it's a bit taboo to talk about it, but if I speak to any woman in this room or anyone that's watching and say, my skin's broken out this week, I want some chocolate, I've got a really bad backache, and I feel crazy, I'm crying at a TV commercial, every single one of them can empathize with what's going on with me emotionally, right? And that's a thing we go through biologically every single month, some of us worse than others. When you display sometimes what can look like random outbursts of emotion, or you can take things more emotionally, I've seen in workplaces that be perceived as complete weakness, like that rules you out for promotion, or that rules you out for that next step in the being taken seriously as a leader. And I think it all comes back to the same kind of thing. Like, if you can't be safe enough somewhere to be yourself and be open and really put your hands up when you're struggling, like, as well as like the diversity piece, companies love talking about mental health, but what's being done about it? And these things impact all of us on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And I know you're a huge advocate for driving positive change for mental health as well. But we do need to understand that the biological differences that can cause, like, I can look back at myself a week later and be like, what was I talking about? Like, I should not have been upset over that little fly off the wall comment. But it's also about knowing that and knowing maybe, you know, let's be a bit more sensitive. It will probably help a lot of the men in our lives be nicer to their women at home and understand them more as well. So it leads to just positive repercussions everywhere, I think. But understanding we are different biologically, our makeup is different, our hormones are different, our ways of viewing things are often different. Women tend to be a little bit more emotionally charged to begin with, and then they'll think things through. So one of the things me and Jacqui discussed last time was, we tend to find, and it's not saying that this is always the case with women and men, of course, but we prep better for meetings. So when we're going into those senior meetings, I've had directors at every stage of companies I've been at, I will get given the operational work to do because I'm the woman that can do it, and they're not involved in the day-to-day detail. They want the big plan and they want it done by next week, and I'm the one that's going to do all the grunt work and get it done for them. So I think it's really important to have that real understanding of the differences each other's have and be able to speak openly about that.
This is, I mean, look, there's, we've whistled through this. I wasn't expecting there to be so much content. So thank you very much for sharing. I think it highlights, you know, how much awareness needs to be built in this area with some of the challenges you're facing. I think we're going to have to do a part 2